Welcome to the Produce on Purpose podcast, where we experience life being the real you. I'm your host, Randy Adkins Jr., and today we have David Buck. He's the author of The Time Optimized Life. He has over 35 years of organizational time management experience, and he has led and started the Kairos Management Solutions and the Infinitive Lifestyle Design program. David empowers business professionals to overcome the struggles of a lack of flexibility in life. He helps his clients craft a strategy to optimize their time that defines a lifestyle focused on meaning, purpose, and joy. Dave resides in Ponte Vedra, Florida, with his wife, the Reverend Dr. Susan Rose. Hello, David. How are you? How are you today?
I am doing well, Randy. Thank you so much for letting me be on your show. It's an honor.
Yeah, it's great to have you on, and I love to just start off our conversation with you giving the opportunity to share a little bit about your journey, what brought you to where you are at this moment, and kind of the key focus of what we'll talk about today.
Well, I love the fact that you have purpose as a part of what you do in your podcast because it took me a long time, but I have found the importance of defining your own purpose in life that's broader than your career, that encompasses everything in your life that can be a driving force. But you mentioned at the beginning, I've been in business development. That's a fancy word for sales. I was in that for a long time. I think everyone's a salesperson, but I learned very early on, and very heavy on the sarcasm here, that these stunning good looks and charisma weren't going to get me anywhere in the sales world. And I learned my ability to be better prepared than my competition. And then ultimately, how I used my time became very, very critical to my success in sales, and found out eventually about 4 or 5 years ago, as I began to help a variety of people, help them manage their time. I said, well, maybe there's actually a business here. And that helped me start Kairos and the Infinity Lifestyle Design program.
Hey, that's awesome. And that's something that we all cannot escape is that time is actually probably our most valuable and precious commodity that we have every single day. Because without it, once it ends, we're no longer here. And if we take it and we take it for granted, we can wake up one day and look and say, what happened to all of my time that I had? So we'll start off and just have a conversation about time a little bit. What do you describe as time management?
So I have looked at time management over time, pun intended, in my own life and in others' lives. When people try to manage their time, they become very reactive. So something comes at you and you're like, oh, I've got to get this done. And you may do it well in that particular time frame, but it neglects maybe the 3 or 4 other things that you've had planned to do in that time frame, that then compounds. So then you find out, now what am I going to do with those 3 or 4 other things, plus the other things that might happen the next day or in the future. And so I like people to try to challenge them to flip the script and, in essence, look at time proactively. And that's where the term optimization comes in. And where I focus on that is that you need to invest time to look out into the future, to do your best to predict how that outcome might happen, knowing you're never going to get it right. But the fact that you spend that time proactively planning means you're in a better position to really decide what to do with your time when other challenges come your way that you haven't anticipated.
It's interesting because then you get to really one of the areas I love to talk about is intentionality. You get to intentionally begin to figure out where your time is really going to be focused on if you understand that future, what that future might look like. And also, what I've also found is that you save time by having that filter because then when things are coming your way, you're able to filter out and say yes to this or no to that. And it's one of those areas that allows for you to kind of start to move in a good direction. What is the common mistake that most people are making? You kind of started to provide us a little bit about the difference between managing and optimizing. What are some of those common mistakes that people are making when it comes to their time?
A lot of times people are distracted, and I define a distraction as taking your focus off of something important to something less important. We are distracted today. As a matter of fact, we're trained to be distracted. And the culprit behind that, the biggest culprit is our smartphones. They are an immense productivity tool. Just imagine if you go back and were able to take your smartphone today and plop it in yourself 30 years ago, if that's the case, or if you're younger, go back even 10 or 15 years, put that in your hand. That's almost science fiction now, what we're able to do. But it's also designed to distract you from what you're doing. Social media wants you to consume your time with them. Notifications on your phone are designed to stop you what you're doing. It can be really, really good, but what I find for many people is it's it takes them away from an important activity, and they end up spending time and then feel guilty because they got sucked into watching YouTube videos for 30 minutes when they should have been working on something more important.
That is true all the way through. Everyone's looking for that dopamine hit of that notification coming from social media. And then you end up in this, to me, it's like a warp of time, either in some feed or watching videos, or and now today with the short form videos, you flip through and continue to flip through, and before you know it, wait a minute, I've been doing this for minutes on end. What are some of the things that we can do to help manage some of that? To me, social media, the phones, there's a lot of us that are dealing with that on a consistent basis. What are your thoughts on how we can begin to attack that in our lives and live a more time optimized way?
I'm going to go back and use the word you used just a little while ago, intentionality. First step is you have to be intentional to say, I've identified an opportunity and I'm going to work on it. And then the second thing is you need to do it incrementally. If you're on your phone for 3 hours a day, and the average person's on about 2.5 hours a day, doing a variety of different things, and you're like, I need to cut that down. Don't try to cut it down right away to, I'm going to only do it 30 minutes a day. Do it incrementally because you have to train yourself and develop the new habits to get away with it. So there's two things you can do. You can say, I'm going to limit my time. Instead of 3 hours a day, I'm going to try to be on it 2.5 hours a day. Or the flip side is you can set a timer and say, I'm going to be on social media, or I'm going to be doing something related to my phone or a lower level activity, and I'm going to set a timer and only do it for 5 minutes increments, and then set another timer for 2 hours later that I'll do it again. Either way that you choose to approach it, do it with a sense of purpose that this is something I want to work on, and then do it incrementally until you achieve the level or the ultimate goal that you want to out of it.
Yeah, so the incremental small chunks of time figuring that out. And I know on and many of the platforms, they actually will tell you your usage, which can sometimes be a downer, but you could at
Mm-hmm.
least you could track and trace and see,
Right.
am I doing any better over time with that? I find it interesting that we have these distractions that are going on all the time, and we start to move down a path of understanding that they are there. So you identify the distraction, you start going down the path and saying, "All right, I want to fix this." What are some other ways we can begin to optimize our relationships, optimize, a lot of times we hear about health and wealth, that those are also important for us. What are some other things we can do there to help with our time optimization?
Well, I'm really glad you mentioned that, Randy, because personal care is an often overlooked element of how you can better use your time. And it's kind of counterintuitive because you're like, I have to spend time to take care of myself. That's taking time away from other valuable things maybe I can do. But when we have a healthy body, mind, and spirit, we put ourselves in a position to then be able to use our time better in other avenues of our life. We have more energy, we have more mental focus, we have the ability to maybe think a little bit more outside of the immediate because we're integrating things on that. And so I find that just the idea, and I'm not a physician, not a medical professional, but things like even 30 minutes of exercise a day, something that gets your heart rate up from what you normally do, is very, very beneficial. If you can sleep 7 to 8 hours a night, that's optimal. Again, if you're sleeping 4, then try to go to 5. But if you can get to 7 or 8 hours of sleep a night, it does amazing things. It gives your body the time to heal and re-energize. And then for me, a spiritual component into it. I know there's a lot of different views on this. As in my Christian faith, I approach something in a particular way, but thinking outside just yourself. It's not all about myself, but it's taking the time to understand there are other avenues and things and around you, this great wide world that we live in. And that gives you an opportunity to, again, not be focused so much internally that you push yourself on these problems, but then you be able to understand the broader nature of what's around you that helps you use your time better.
That's awesome. One of the things that I've been, I guess, guilty of is thinking that I can multitask. I'm a computer program software engineer, so I do understand that, in computers we can bring up multiple cores of a computer and have them what we call parallel processing. But for humans, I don't know how well I really do at multitasking because I'll try to listen maybe to what my wife is saying while watching television. They always laugh at me because if I'm watching a show on television and they try to ask me a question, I can't, I don't do really well with that. What are your thoughts on multitasking? Because I've heard people say that they are just awesome at multitasking. What are your thoughts and views on that?
So I am not a fan of the term multitasking. There's a lot smarter people than me with a lot more letters after their name and institutions that have studied this. And what I've come away from that is that people really are, humans are wired to focus on one thing fully at a time. Having said that, multitasking in lower level priorities, let's like I walk and I listen to a podcast. You could say that that's multitasking. It's lower level activities of the brain. Musicians are another perfect example of people who can sing and say play the guitar or do the keyboards. You might say that they're multitasking, but what comes behind that is hours and hours and hours of either practice or playing that creates this area where you have trained your brain. It's a very repetitive thing that I can do with very little direct engagement. So I try to tell people, think microtasking versus multitasking. So if you've got 12 tabs up on your browser and you're trying to flow back and forth between those because you're thinking you'll be able to do more than one thing, at least stop and give it your full attention for a period of time so you're fully engaged with it. And then quick, if you have to switch back to something else, that's fine. But understand you're really only going to be able to do one thing well at a time.
Yeah, it's interesting because we talk about it at work sometimes. It's called context switching, especially if you're a programmer and you are programming and you're going down this train of thought, and then someone just calls you and say, "Hey, I need such and such," and you're like, "Okay." Then you go to such and such, and then you say, "Where was I?" And sometimes that will take you a whole line to end up getting through. So doing that one thing at a time can, I think, sometimes be difficult for others. Sometimes, are there any uh, ideas that you have on how long we should be focused on anything, and potentially if is there anything out there that can help us as we're trying to get those more lines of that micro tasking that you're talking about?
Yeah, it's obviously situational on what you're doing. One of my favorite books is Deep Work by Cal Newport, and he talks about these very deep, long, focused time frames where you're really doing only one specific activity for a long period of time. And I think that's great if you can do that. I think for many of us, we're bombarded with outside stimuli a lot. Not, I'm not saying that Cal isn't, but in our realm, the idea is plan out your day, blocks of increments that you think you're going to take those time frames up. But in the middle of that, also block out times to take a break. And what I mean taking a break is stepping away from what you're doing, probably even removing yourself from the environment for a short period of time and coming back to it. Because there's an economics term called marginal utility, and basically that says as you do something more and more and more, you get less satisfaction or less productivity out of it. So at some point, we have a law of diminishing marginal returns. So instead of waiting for that, put an occasional break in there, whether it's after every half an hour, depending on what you're doing, every hour, but somewhere along the lines, you're intentional in breaking up what you're doing to refresh, recycle your brain, and give you freshness.
I like that. It sounds like, and as we're going through doing different things in a day, that we should take breaks. There should be times to do that. And I've also heard, even from a health perspective, like it makes sense to get up and walk sometimes if you have a
Hmm.
sedentary type a job that you're doing to, be able to get up and walk as well by intentionally putting that together. So as you're talking about these items, or we're talking about life, what are some of the ways that we can begin to optimize? And you said you were able to figure out some items in your sales career. How were you able to figure out the optimizations for a career in what you're doing in a particular day? Because we know we have, whether it's tasks, meetings, all of these different things that are going on. What were some of those pieces that you were able to implement and steps to take?
So as I have gone through both my personal life and working with clients, there's a system I use called PEC, preparation, execution, and control. The idea behind this is that you use it macroly or globally, and you also use it tactically. In each one of those sense, the first step you have to do is invest time in preparing for what you're going to do. And trying to anticipate the elements that you have to do to be successful in said task, activity, project, or whatever you're doing. Then you say, okay, I think I've prepared what I need to do. Then I start to execute against that plan or that preparation. And in that, it's not just blindly doing it, but you're also aware of, am I meeting what I need to do in this? And if not, maybe you have to stop again and go prepare a little bit more because maybe that wasn't done right.
Hmm.
But then as you execute and you're working through, things are great. Then the control element is your ability to challenge yourself that you're going to meet that obligation. That as I go through all that, and if you find you're not in control, then you have to decide again, do I have to go change how I'm executing? Do I have to prepare again? The three end up working in tandem and continuously, again, on a macro or micro level, so that you put yourself in a position that you're, again, anticipating what's trying to happen and you adjust accordingly to finally reach the outcomes that you want to reach in hopefully the time frames you set for yourself.
It sounds like you would take a plan or preparation that you're trying to do at a very high level. You break that up and make sure you're executing. And then it sounds like the control, I'm guessing, is a check. Right? Hey, am I actually getting where I'm supposed to go, or do I need to figure out, do I need to change it up? And I think this is an interesting thing because I always talk about, maybe in school we learned that you got to get everything right before you move forward. But it sounds like you're saying go out, start, and you can prepare, but you may learn something in your execution that you can maybe update your preparation and go back to execution, or you might get into control and find and figure something out. And maybe I got to go all the way back to preparation, but you're iterating through. And that's what I found in life. It seems like life is that way, is that we learn the best when we start going through all of these items. And like, I figure out, man, I don't know how much I really like that anymore. I get new ways of saving my time. I feel like the older we get, we figure out how to save time much better. Whether it's, I'm young, I can jump up and I'll go turn the television off with my finger, or, like, where's the remote? I don't have
Right.
to even move for that. So, hey, I'm optimizing my time here. I'm figuring it out. Innovation.
Right. There you go. And intention. You had an intention there too.
So as we are going through this process and in career, sounds like you're implementing this PEC throughout. The idea of putting it in place. Now I have that in place, and I want to kind of measure how my life is going. What are some things I can do to see whether or not I am making progress, or what are some of the outcomes that would come out of that? Is it just what I define, or are there other areas that I should see?
So we all have today access to a calendar, and even if it's a paper calendar, that to me is the basis. Since we all have it, one of the things I try to do is there's so many great tools out there, but people end up investing time and money in those tools, and they never really seek improvement. So I'm all about the basics. The first step is I plan my calendar 2 weeks out, basically for most of my awake time. And I know that it's going to change. It's going to flex. But the idea of planning that calendar 2 weeks out tells me that I'm trying to control what as best I can. That's that preparation aspect. And then the execution stuff is you begin to execute on those days. And today I already had to change a couple of things that I planned on it because I had other things come up that I didn't anticipate. No biggie. I had planned for that, but I changed as I executed. The control element ultimately comes back to the fact that I do two things. So you are my last appointment today. At the end of this, I'm going to evaluate what my day was look like and said, did I get everything, key things that I need to get done? And then I look at tomorrow and I say, okay, do I have to adjust things tomorrow to reflect if I missed anything for today? Then I go to sleep. I wake up in the morning, but I do the exact same thing in the morning. I double check my day because we live in a 24-hour world. And depending on what you do, you may have things change overnight. So it's just a gut check. And so I continue to do that. And then over time, I'll be able to reflect on if I am meeting those needs, if I am completing the tasks I have established for myself. One last thing, if you're kind of like, I need something more technical, there are two free apps you can download, Toggle or Clockify. Those are time tracking tools. And you got to be diligent on tracking it. But I tell you, most people, when I put them through that, if they go through it after 6 weeks, they're shocked at how much time they waste. So if you really want to get in detailed on it, but if you don't want to bother with that, just do the calendar process. You'll intuitively begin to understand where you've got opportunities.
Kind of reminds me of when you talked about waste. Is sometimes you want to find out, where's my money going? If you don't have a budget and somebody takes a look at their budget, I remember years ago we were looking at our budget and we're like, did we just spend that much money on food, going out to eat? So doing the same thing with your time of saying, all right, I want to make this better by using those free apps that you just talked about to go in and check and say, wait a minute, I've been saying I don't have enough time, but maybe I do have more time. And I think that's interesting because it is something I've heard from many people that they say, well, I don't have enough time to do that. What's your response to anyone that's saying that in their lives of, hey, look, I don't have enough time to do that anymore.
So yeah, and I have been guilty of saying that myself before. Uh, I think the first thing you have to say to yourself is what are you doing in your life? So one of the things, particularly when our kids were younger, in order for me to balance career and the personal life, is we made said you guys have one sport that you can go after, because that helped us put structure around things. And so I think I have to ask, you got to audit what are all the things you're doing in your life? And then you have to say, do I have to continue to do those, or can I pare them down? And then I think the second thing you look at, if you don't have enough time, is really decide, where are you spending your time? Are you investing the time that you have in the most important things that you should be focused on in your life? And it typically, what happens a lot with people in career, I've been as guilty as this as well, you default to reacting very quickly on the professional side of life, and you use the personal side of life as the way to get that extra time. And I'm not a fan of work-life balance, but I am a fan of work-life flexibility. And that's the important element of why you should plan your entire life, your personal and professional life, so that you know where am I spending my time, and maybe where do I need to make adjustments.
Interesting, because I think one of the things that stood out to me was priority. You kind of talked about priority there, because if you don't understand what your priorities are, then you don't know where you're going to really spend your time. And if you're just going with whatever comes your way, then your time is going to get spent on whatever comes your way instead of you being more intentional about that. Then I believe you sounds like you can have choices to where you are going to spend your time and how you're going to do that. As you're going through this, I'm thinking of multiple things, and kudos to you for telling your children only to do one. Because I remember at one point, I believe one was in dance and in a couple of other things, and we were all over the place. And we did have a calendar together, but it felt like we were just moving
Right.
between each other, having to do a lot. What are some key elements maybe for, I know a lot of what you've talked about is kind of personal time management, but maybe with a group, whether it's a husband and a wife or family, what are some ways they can help to optimize their time? Because it sounds like this is going to be helpful not only in your professional world, but also in your personal world.
Well, thank you. And I would say, first and foremost, particularly in a family dynamic with your spouse, understand that probably both of you are going to approach your use of time differently. One of the things that when I work with clients is, I don't have a 10-step program. So you don't, you do these 10 things and your life magically changes, because we all approach it differently. One of the things that I have learned is, like, I tried to, this was probably about 20 years ago. I was asked my wife, hey, could we get this done? I set her a task. That didn't go over well.
I
That's
bet.
not how right. Right. I said, well, if she's not going to, I'll send her a task, because that's what I use tasks. So you need to sit down with your spouse, your wife, even your kids, depending on what their ages is, and map out a family strategy. How are we going to communicate? I do like the fact that, because of our electronic ages, that you try to do one calendar, or if you have a family calendar, make sure that you put those times on your own personal calendar, so you show the importance of being there. But I think once you sit down and you map out the family strategy, then it becomes a lot of discussions about, what's the goal? What can this is what I'm going to approach this by. Tell me how you're going to approach it. Because my wife and my wife is extremely efficient, but she does it so differently than I do. And it drives me crazy sometimes, and vice versa. And so we've learned, we're going to get to the point at the same time. We're just going to go about it a lot differently. But I will also tell her, and she will tell me, this is my approach I'm going to take. So just know I'm going to be there, or we're going to get this done. Just know it's going to be a lot different than you.
leaving availability for different approaches, that's really cool because, time in the end and how we all manage it is just like currency. So we got to learn how to manage it together and work it out and say, how are we going to do this as a family and as we're moving forward? For those that are on that in that place of either a transition in their career or a retirement place in age, what do you have to share with them? Because I've met many people that their dream was to retire, and I'll put it in quotes, and then when they get to that place, it's not quite what they thought it was going to be when it came to their time. What are some of the keys that you provide for them?
Yeah, I think even if someone's in a career transition or they're going to transition out into retirement, consider this. If you're working 48 hours a week and you're fortunate enough to sleep 7 hours a night, that's 40% of your awake time is structured around a career or a job. Imagine that goes away instantaneously. So Friday you're done, Monday you start retirement. You have to figure out not only did you have the other awake time, but you now have 40% of your awake time that you have to figure out with, or now 2/3 of your entire existence. If you sleep a third and you awake 2/3, you have to figure out what to do with that time. And I go back to again in the title in your podcast of purpose. People don't define a purpose. If you ask them today, so what do you do for a living? That becomes the purpose statement. I want people to jettison that term and say, here is my purpose in life. That purpose can be a 1 or 2 sentence statement. It's like a company's vision or mission statement. You use that as the gauge or the guide to define the rest of your activities and test how you're spending your time against that purpose to see if it brings value. And again, that purpose could include your career. That doesn't mean, but it shouldn't be everything behind that, so that if the career went away, you can still move forward in life because you're living to your purpose.
Yeah, associating our identity with what we do or our careers, it is so fluid in our lives that things change, whether it is the careers that we have. We are in a transition of our life where our children we have one left in high school, and now all of them are going to be in, people call it empty nesting, but we call it bird launching. We are in
I
that
like
bird
that.
launching stage, and we do have more time than we had before. And it is definitely interesting for both me and my wife. We're trying to figure out, all right, what am I going to do with this time that I have, and how do I prepare for that? The purpose doesn't change. And I like how you talked about that, because our purpose doesn't change, but the expression of how we use that purpose and how that looks throughout our seasons of life and transition, that does change over time. So as you are been talking and been sharing all of this great information, the time optimized life and your journey, what are 2 to 3 things you would leave with the audience that they should go out and start to implement and put in their lives today so that they can produce on purpose?
So the first thing I go back to is get control, if you have to, of how you are in front of screens. I call it screens, can be your phone, computer, television. Monitor and seek improvement on the amount of time you're in front of a screen. That will help then open up freedom and time. The second thing that I would ask is patience. When you are doing something important and you go through the planning process and you say, okay, this is going to take me an hour, add at least 50% on top of that. Because anything that you do in life, if you sit back and reflect, that was good and complex, always took longer than anticipated. So really, really focus there. And then the third element that I would say with people is give yourself grace. If you find that you were looking at social media for 30 minutes and you weren't supposed to, yes, that time is lost that you can't get back, but you still have an opportunity to look forward, to rearrange things, to hopefully, in theory, get that time back because you're more efficient with what you're doing.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing those specific tips that we can take and be able to utilize that time optimized life. We can start to put that in place and make sure that we're really watching that screen time, making sure that we're prioritizing, putting things in the right place, and making sure we understand. Hey, give yourself some grace because you'll mess up sometimes. We might not like it, and put it in place. So, David, how can my audience find you and connect with you?
Well, first of all, Randy, thanks again for letting me be on the show. It's been an honor for me. The time flew by quickly, so I always
Yeah.
consider that good time. Uh, and for me, if you'd like to go to infinitylifestyledesign.com, again, infinitylifestyledesign.com. On my front page, first thing you can do, you can click in and you can download chapter 1 of my book. So if you want to give a flavor of what is time optimization, you can do that. And then also further down on the front page, there's 2 assessments, free assessments you can take. One is the time management analysis. That's for people who are in career. You can get an idea of where are my opportunities? Where can I focus on? And then the second one is the retirement time analysis. If you're getting closer to retirement, you got to figure out what am I going to do with all this free time? That assessment, also free for you to take, gives you an idea of things you need to think about because life post-career is a lot different than life pre-career. So I just encourage anybody to check those out. And if you're interested, take advantage of them.
Definitely encourage everyone to reach out and connect with David and understand more about time. I have learned more about my time management and knowing that it's not about managing the time, but I should be in a place of optimizing my time and also learning how to, get rid of those distractions. Let's see, what are some of the things that we can do? And I also picked up on that PEC, so we can prepare, we can execute, and we can control. I believe is something that we can all take as great wisdom and information we can use, and that most of all that we can all produce on purpose. All right.